I'm very happy to welcome all of you to this webinar today. That is just for today also part of a public lecture series on foundational economy and socio-ecological transformation, a good life for all within planetary boundaries, at the Institute of Spatial Planning and the Department of Public Finance and Infrastructure Policy at the Vienna University of Technology. My name is Raphael Deindl, and I'm a research assistant at the Institute of Sociology at the Johannes Kepler University in Linz, and I have the pleasure of moderating this webinar today. The webinar series, as you can see here on this presentation, under the title Shaping Provisioning Systems for Social Ecological Transformation, Decent Care for All Within Planetary Boundaries, is organized by Corinna Dengler, Julia Steinberger, and Fabienne Décieux. Corinna and Julia are both affiliated to the Vienna University of Economics and Business, and they're working at the Institute of Multi-Level Governance and Development. And Fabienne Décieux, she works at the Department of Sociology at the University of Vienna. And Julia and Fabienne are also both board members of the International Kalpolani Society, and this whole webinar series is hosted by the International Kalpolani Society, and also is also funded by the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation in Brussels. So this is the organizational context of this webinar series. And as you can see, today's event is already the third session, and there will be a fourth and a final one on November 22nd. The first two events addressed the issues of towards a caring economy and transition towards a caring society, whereas the focus of today's webinar is on the question of decent care for all within planetary boundaries. So today's event therefore follows up directly on the previous discussions. And if you might have missed the last two, and also perhaps you know somebody who missed this today, you are interested what has been discussed and what was the topic of the last ones, you can find the recordings on the homepage of the International Kalpolani Society. And as I said at the beginning, also this webinar today will be recorded, so you have the possibility afterwards to rewatch it. So the whole webinar series puts the inclusive, resilient, and sustainable provisioning of care for all within planetary boundaries into focus. It takes stock of pioneering work and recent approaches at the intersection of feminist and ecological research, and foregrounds the relevance of care in addressing the ecological crisis. And in this discussion, we are continuing the series today. And after establishing in the last two sessions, after establishing the relevance of care for addressing the ecological crisis, we try to discuss today, and we try to discuss the potential and strategies for transitioning from an economic system that does not prioritize care today and caring society. The aim of today, of the third webinar, is to establish the nexus between decent living standards within planetary boundaries and care in the current national and international crisis. And we will focus on different questions, like how can the current care crisis be addressed nationally and internationally? What is the role of non-material caring needs? How can decent levels of care be met without transgressing planetary limits? And also, and finally, what is the social and ecological impact of care provisioning through transnational care chains? With this in mind, with all these questions, I'm very pleased to introduce our distinguished speakers today. First, I will introduce all three speakers very briefly in the order in which they will speak this evening. So I will start with Corinna Dengler. Since 2021, Corinna works as an assistant professor at the Department of Socioeconomics at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. Her research focuses are on heterodox economics, with an emphasis on feminist economics, ecological economics, and global political economy. And she is interested in inter and transdisciplinary work at the intersections of feminism, decoloniality, and the environment more broadly. Today, Corinna will start by introducing a feminist ecological perspective that our current economic system only focuses on what is valued in monetary terms and thereby makes unpaid care work and nature structurally invisible, exploit especially care, and destroys especially nature. Against this background, she explains why the demands for good care for all within planetary boundaries ultimately require a distribution strategy. As the second speaker, I would like to introduce Attila Melegh. He's a sociologist, economist, and historian. He works as an associate professor at Corvinus University in Budapest, and he's also a senior researcher at the Demographic Research Institute. He was the founding director of Karl Polanyi Research Center at Corvinus University between 2014 and 2022, and for spring in the upcoming year for 2024, he has been selected as a Vienna Karl Polanyi visiting professor at the Vienna University of Economics and Business. His research focus is on population discourses, migration, and global social change in the 20th century. And today he will talk about the traps of care marketization and why it is bound to increase. As a solution for this, only massive changes in economic models toward a mixed economy and relocating care funding into the economic processes directly can help. So I guess we are all very excited and glad to have you here today, Attila. And last but not least, I would like to introduce Fabienne Décieux. Fabienne is a research assistant at the Institute of Sociology at the University of Vienna within the FWF project Norms Around Motherhood. And her main research areas are social theory, sociology of work and care, social policy, and gender studies. And in her PhD, she is doing research on requirements and demands in early childcare. And today, in our discussion today, she will talk about care struggles and negotiations in the current care crisis and how this also affects the caregivers and not just the receivers. And so this is our discussion group today. I'm very, so we all can be very happy to have such an interesting group of experts here today. And at the beginning, we will start with all three inputs. Each of them will have, I think, 10 minutes time. And afterwards, the speakers will have the opportunity to react to each other and they can discuss and they can give questions. And finally, we will open the floor for questions of the audience. I think this is the plan for today, and I will now give the floor to you, Corinna. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Raphael. Let me just briefly share my screen. Okay. Thanks so much, Raphael, for the kind introduction and also for the invitation to be a speaker in the third webinar of the EKPS series. As Raphael has already mentioned, what we will have to try to do today is to bring everybody on board. So to bring on board the people who have already followed our first two EKPS webinars with the topic of care, and the people from the Ringvorlesung, which have talked a lot about planetary boundaries and ecological struggles, but not really about care yet. So in this first input, I'm briefly trying to set the ground for both. And I want to start with the second part of the title, with the planetary boundaries. So what are planetary boundaries? Most of you will have already heard about it and seen this graph or earlier versions of this graph. This is what we commonly refer to when we talk about planetary boundaries. It's been first introduced by the Stockholm Resilience Center in 2009, we actualized in 2015, and this newest graph is from September this year, when a number of researchers at the Stockholm Resilience Center have for the first time managed to quantify all 9 planetary boundaries like climate change, biosphere integrity, or land system change, and also came to the worrying conclusions that we have already transgressed 6 of those. Social scientists, 29 of them I counted before I added this, amongst them or with the lead author Ulrich Brandt, who I think is also here in the audience, have called for a social science perspective on this topic of planetary boundaries. In this paper, from planetary to societal boundaries, an argument for collectively defined self-limitation, they argue that we really need a social ecological perspective on the planetary boundaries debate. So taking a social ecological stance now on planetary boundaries, we see that one of the most crucial questions of our time is now and probably remains for the next decades, how we can guarantee a good life for all within planetary boundaries, which would be a safe and just operating space for both humans and more than humans. And today in this webinar, we want to focus on the specific topic of care. What does good care for all within planetary boundaries look like? So when we talk about care in feminist economics, we mostly refer to what I would categorize as a narrow definition of care. And this is also mostly what I will be talking about today. So in this narrow definition, care work would be a caring activity which is provided by a caregiver to a care receiver. So it would be, for example, if a parent cares for their child, like the act of caring, this caring activity would be care work. Care work has some specific characteristics which distinguish it from other kinds of work. So, for example, the limited autonomy in the example I brought, for example, of the child, vulnerability, asymmetrical power relations, and also emotionality, which makes care work a specific kind of work that doesn't really work well with a capitalist growth paradigm because it follows a logic of time spending rather than a logic of time saving. And also as definitions, we have a quite strong focus on dependency. So care receivers depend on the care given to them. What's important is that the term of care work doesn't per se say anything about where the care is provided, whether it is provided in households, on markets, in welfare states. And it also doesn't say anything about whether it is paid or unpaid. I will be talking mostly about unpaid care work later, but I believe that with Attila and Fabienne, we will dive deeper also into the paid care work sector. So there are also broader definitions of care, which I will not go into so much in this presentation, but we maybe can come back to it in the discussion. So those are definitions, for example, when we talk about care as a cornerstone of social ecological transformation, where the focus is more on interdependency. So this is maybe something we can just keep in mind for later. But what I want to talk about now is how is care work and specifically unpaid care work valued or devalued in our current economic system? Sorry, I think someone is unmuted.
I re-muted the person, don't worry.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so I want to work now with this. No, I think the person isn't mute. Maybe no.
I muted her again. Yeah.
Thanks, Fabienne. So I want to explain the structural issues that Raphael introduced already before. by using this graphic. What you see in this figure is basically a model where you see the monetized economy on the top of the triangle above the boundary. And maybe it also helps to think about it with in the metaphors that Maria Mies, an ecofeminist, very important ecofeminist who unfortunately died in the age of 92 earlier this year, has coined the metaphor of an iceberg. So if we think about this monetized economy as the tip of the iceberg, which has everything in it, which is counted in GDP, which we see as the focus of our economic analysis, what we consider as productive work or as valuable. We also know that the tip of an iceberg cannot exist without an invisible underwater foundation, so to say. And in this model, what we see is the underwater foundation consists of unpaid care work and of ecological processes. And now both of those unpaid care work and the ecological processes, Raphael has already mentioned this in the introduction. Feminist ecological economists would argue both unpaid care work and ecological processes resemble each other, being invisibilized, devalued, and destroyed in our current economic system, which only considers economic what is counted in GDP. So I want to stay now on the right side of the triangle with the caring activities. Now, when we think about unpaid care work, what are different strategies to deal with it? Ulrike Knobloch has done a model which is called the 4 V's in German. So in German, it's nicer because all of them start with a V. But in English, she summarizes that basically we have the possibilities of avoiding unpaid care work, for example, by cleaning less frequently, of transforming it by means of technological innovation, of shifting, or of redistributing it. And the avoidance and the transformation, I would argue, are only viable to a very limited extent. So at some points, the flat just is too dirty. And with regard to technological innovation, the washing machine was a great invention, certainly, but if we think about good care for all within planetary boundaries, care robots might not be the way forward or the utopia we have in mind. What I would argue is that basically in our current economic system, what happens the most is really the strategy of shifting. So knowing that only monetary value gives social recognition or societal recognition, we try to shift unpaid care work, often to paid care work. This is a strategy which doesn't particularly work well because we see that paid care work is notoriously underpaid and very often under precarious working conditions. Also, it is certainly the case that depending on where we shift the unpaid care work to, the implications differ. So, for example, shifting it to the market, and I believe the other speakers will talk about marketization, has much more problems with regard to social justice than thus, for example, shifting it to the welfare state or to public provisioning. But even for European welfare states, we see that they are ecologically non-generalizable. So really trying to shift whatever is unpaid to the paid care sector just doesn't work, and it often reproduces intersectional inequalities. So this, what we see is that it reifies rather than overcomes the boundary, and this is not really possible to solve the care crisis on a structural level. So what I would argue and what I would hope to discuss with you later is that for good care for all within planetary boundaries, we really need to move to this 4th strategy, the strategy of redistribution. I already said that. So to put a focus really on a redistribution strategy, this really needs also a shift in in what we regard as valuable. So as long as we only regard as valuable what is monetized, a redistribution strategy doesn't really make sense, because why should, for example, if we see that the lion's share of unpaid care work is now done by women, like why should other people want to take over more? And we see that actually there is a lot of persistence in time use data. So to really center stage this redistribution strategy, this requires first and foremost to think about time. And this is actually a topic that we talked about a lot in the last webinar. So we need to think about changing time regimes by reducing the time spent in wage work for everybody. Obviously, this has to go together with changing wage relations, because we know that reducing the time spent in wage work is now a privilege of those who can afford it. So it needs to go together with social policies, with universal basic services, with a way of decoupling livelihood security from wage work. And ultimately, and I'm going to end with this for now, it means reorganizing societies around care in the way of making care more visible, and not only paid care work, but also unpaid care work as something we need to collectively take care of, rather than it just being relegated to private households. I leave it as this for now. Thanks a lot, and I look forward to discuss later.
Thank you very much, Corinna, for this interesting perspective on why we need this shift for redistribution and why it is necessary. And I think there will be enough time to discuss this, and because it's very important and necessary. Okay, so I think we will follow directly with the next input from Attila. So Attila, it's your turn.
First of all, it's a privilege to be with you, and it's also a privilege to think about such important issues what we are trying to address today, and then you have been trying to address it in the previous webinars as well. So, and then there are a lot to talk about. And I think after Corinna's talk, I think I can stand on it in quite a number of ways. But basically what I'm trying to put together in these 10 minutes is two things. First, I would like to analyze the current historical situation, in the sense that it seems that we are experiencing a marketization trap, meaning that the already done marketization may go further, and it is going to be even more contradictory. So in that sense, I think we have to warn ourselves that the historical turn toward such models what Corinna was also talking about is we don't see it yet. And then we have to analyze really the historical situation, because only from history and the dynamic analysis of history we can see what's going to happen. And then the next point, what I would try to do in this discussion is some kind of a preliminary ideas how we can relocate care back into the economy, because one of the key contradictions of capitalism is that it is, as it was beautifully shown in the graphs, it is basically suppressing it, subordinating it, using it, and exploiting it massively, but unable to get into the surface. So in that sense, that's crystal clear. So we really need new economic models, and then I will try to give some ideas what we may think about. Now, the historical situation and this marketization trap. The history of humanity is very interesting from the point of view of two things which I've been dealing with. This one is, of course, demography, and the other one is the development of the integration of the economy into society. So these various economic forms, how they have been developing. And then right now, by the end of the 20th century, we ultimately got into a period when some kind of a system which was extremely problematic, extremely patriarchal, extremely tense. Nonetheless, it was in some ways ecological and caring at the same time. The collapse of the peasant economies throughout the world because of the long-term development of capitalism became, by the 1970s, 80s, completely final. And actually, we are eating up this system at such a rate that it may appear that this kind of a form which was based on not just household caring activities or reproduction activities, but also production as well, is going to be a memory of the distant past. Now, the problem in this is not that it has been an extremely patriarchal, extremely problematic system. So do not think that I'm going to idolize it. On the contrary, the only thing I'm trying to say with this, that this system has been collapsed, and we had this system basically since the Neolithics. So this was one of the longest term serving forms ever in humanity, which was, producing based on household labor and based on the care for the sick and the elderly and the children within this system. And then the whole economic system was organized around this embeddedness of these different forms into each other. So care and work could not be really separated. Now this means that basically we are left with two very important institutional frameworks, namely the state and the market. And the state and the market, of course, there's a big struggle around this. This has been one of the biggest problems in economic thinking, how to relate this in the construction of capitalism. The point is that in this neoliberal era, we can see crystal clearly, we can see the data, is that the state, relatively speaking, is losing momentum in the sense that redistribution levels at maximum they stagnate, but in many areas of the world actually decline. I'm coming from a region, Eastern Europe, where it has been declining massively. And in this kind of a redistributional decline, of course, we can understand this in a whole different ways. This is, current neoliberal capitalism trying to please all kinds of investors in order to go ahead. And then here comes something very important. In the meantime, of course, we see the dramatic aging, and we see the absolute and the relative increase of care need in societies. So how it can be solved? For instance, healthcare costs are rising more rapidly than the economic growth. During globalization, economic growth was not slow, but healthcare costs were rising quicker than the economic development. And the point is the following, which is the first point, that in case we have this dilemma, stagnating or low redistribution or lowering redistribution rates, the only solution to finance any kind of a system of care is economic growth, because that's the only way how the incomes and then the revenues can be secured for this. So already in this trap, we have this dramatic push toward economic growth. So there's no sane government at the moment which is not crossing its finger in order to have a high level of economic growth in order to finance, for instance, the current social systems. The examples in Europe and outside Europe are abundant. I don't want to go into this, but look at France, Brazil, and various other countries in this respect, and then you can see what I am talking about. Now, very importantly, one of these, in this marketization, what do I mean by marketization? By marketization, I think there are marketization cycles. This has been beautifully written down by Burovoy as well, and various other people, and the world system theorists as well, Chase Dunn and various other people. So we have certain periods when not only the economic openness is increasing, but also market advances into society where it has not been there, right? Now, in that process, something is very important concerning care is the creation of a global market, a global labor market of care, which is a rather recent phenomenon in a lot of ways. Locally, it existed, but never at such a global level, what we are seeing at this. And then here comes, you know, once again, the trap. Why I'm saying that this is not going to stop. First of all, why migrants are moving? Why are they taking these jobs? And then one of the key things is exactly this neoliberal era. We know, for instance, just one thing, a lot of people think that most migrants would like to leave because of revenues directly, but that's not true. Mainly they look at what kind of stability they can expect and state services they can expect. And they are, of course, clear in this because with these dying peasant economies, they need basically revenues in most of the world. They have to accumulate an enormous amount of money in order to finance their own care and their family's care. So in case your father is getting into hospital in India, I mean, you have to have a fortune in order to finance this properly, which means that migration is very much related to this kind of a double move in that sense, that they would like to go into the market in order to raise revenues in the long run, of course, in those countries where the revenues are higher. Plus, very importantly, they are also looking for some kind of a social security for themselves. So this care crisis in this respect is that now in that sense, you know, migration is also becoming some kind of a promoter of this further marketization because of the global care market and because of these very important intentions. And I think what is important that, of course, the financial marketization, the financialization of society is also going into that direction, namely that the existing funds which have been created in the financial systems, they all the time, like a pyramid game, they need more money to get into that. So there is a vested interest in that sense as well to go further with the marketization. All in all, I would just add that in this aging society, then not seeing the new economic models, we cannot expect but this process to go on. I would like to add one more thing to this, which is very much related to our neoliberal era, which is increasing the care crisis, I think massively, the so-called flexibilization of the labor force. Labor is needed. Labor is getting smaller shares in the neoliberal era. And in order to survive, it has to be even more flexible. This flexibilization means that a lot of families, and also the transnationalization of that as well, it means that families are losing potentials in providing any kind of a care, even sometimes for the children, as we can see it in a lot of societies. So this, I think, is once again pushing toward market services, paid actors, in order to take over the functions what the family is unable to do because of the flexibilization of this labor. So altogether, what I was trying to say that unfortunately, I think our discussion is so important that the tendencies and the problems are just getting way too big. And then we need to think about that. One more point what I wanted to say, because it's already too long and I apologize for this, but the next point is that what kind of systems can move out of this trap? So in my view, this current form of capitalism is unable to solve care and is going to blow up. In that sense, I absolutely agree with Corinna. But I think the way we would like to move toward is not crystal clear, because I think we need to change some of the key economic institutions. Namely, what I would like to put in as an argument that we have to reintegrate care into the work process and the economic processes themselves directly. Now, of course, this is not working in, as Corinna very nicely told us, it is not working in the current conditions. Why is it not working? Because there are very serious problems concerning the control over workplaces and companies, and what kind of a micro redistribution is happening there. So we always try to forget the problem of ownership of these companies and these workplaces, and that this ownership is crucial. I give you one example. And
Attila, I just have to look at the clock. So perhaps because I just don't want to interrupt you, but perhaps you have 1-2 more minutes.
1 minute.
I hope it's okay. Okay, perfect.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Just 1 minute. So the most important thing is that we need to take back control over workplaces and then introduce all kinds of care needs into this process. So we have to put back people on the payroll of companies which are also doing a micro redistribution. This macro redistribution that the state and the market as such is not going to work, and this is what I wanted to make clear. But we have to do this micro redistribution. We have to take over this control, which means that we have to be able to avoid certain profit motives here. Plus, very importantly, we cannot sell companies. So the security of these companies are also very important, because otherwise they're not able to do that, which means the all in all, in one sentence, what I'm trying to say is that we really need to move to non-capitalist mixed economies, because as soon as these institutions are changed, the market is going to be harnessed. And then if the market is harnessed, then society is able to do this big vitality of social forms. And we have the historical evidence that in non-capitalist economies, this is exactly what has been going on. So there is a hope for even for the 21st century. Thank you very much. Sorry for talking a little bit longer.
Thank you very much for this really, really interesting insights in this, I think, big discussion. And I think we will have plenty of time to discuss this, because I think especially the last words are very, very important. And I think we will discuss this yes. And so finally, we have one more input from Fabienne. So Fabienne, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I think I will pick up on both of the talks before, and thank you also for inviting me. I think we all agree on the question that under the current circumstances, neither care is provided decently, not within the planetary boundaries in times of neoliberalism. And I will have a look not only at paid care work, but also unpaid care work in my talk, because I'm focusing on struggles about decent care. And to talk about decent care, we have to think what decent care is. And I'm not quite sure whether we clarified that. So I will give you the insight of my perspective there, because decent care is provided when it is only provided for the purpose of care and not for the purpose of economic reasons or something else. So it's unalienated when care is provided just in order to provide care, which is pretty difficult because, as Corinna has pointed out earlier, we have several power structures, we have vulnerabilities, and as Attila has pointed out, the economy or the marketization has a great interest in this field and has a great impact within this field. But I think we have to remind what should be the purpose of care, which isn't fulfilled when we are discussing about it. So under the auspices of neoliberalism, I think we can all agree also on the things which have been presented by my colleagues before, that one of the pretty significant things is that care needs are individualized and subjectivized, although they are a big societal question, because everybody is or will be in need for care in some times of his or her life within our society. So it is of great importance, as well as we are in need for a planetary who's functioning within the boundaries of nature and so forth. So we are talking about a pretty important topic today. So on the side of the care receivers, we are looking on like a holistic perspective. And as we said, like we have like some kind of a power structure, but also on the sides of the care providers, which are mainly women, and in a lot of times, which are migrants, as Attila pointed out and Corinna did before. In paid care work, we have like, or in care work in general, we have like not only the tendency of subjectivation and individualization, but also the tendency of the transnationalization of work, which Attila already explained. I will not pick up on that anymore because I think he did a great job and we all understood that the market plays an important role and that also a certain income is a basis for being taken care of later or for family members to have been to have the resources to provide care for them later. Another point we already talked about is the issue of the state, that the state changed, the welfare states changed during the neoliberalization. But it's not the same in every country. We have like specific welfare mixes which provide different kind of welfare systems. In the case of Austria, because I'm studying mainly the case of Austria, you can see like still a pretty big importance of non-profit organizations and like the so-called third sector, but also still the family is of pretty great importance. We see what you were explaining before, Attila, that the family can't provide care as it did before, and the household can't provide it as it did before. But the traditional norms, which are still prevailing in Austria, show us, for example, in the European Values Survey, which has been the latest data have been published like in 2018, they show that the family has like the same importance as it had like 30 years ago. So that didn't change. And still mothers or daughters or daughters-in-law, I hope it's the right name, are still the one who should take care in unpaid way for the children, the mothers, fathers-in-law, and so forth. But at the same time, under neoliberal auspices, and also following the demands of feminist movements, they are asked to go working. So we have like persisting old demands on care, which are mainly addressing females. Attila, you pointed out the patriarchal system we had before, which was organized differently, but these like gender division of care and work still is persisting, although societal circumstances changed. And so not even in unpaid care work women are addressed, but also in paid care work, as I said before. We can see like especially mothers in the current times are under great pressure to fulfill the ideal worker and also like demands on good mothering, and they are really struggling also due to the fact that care is individualized, and they are said that they have the choice whether they want to go on and give their children into public childcare, private childcare, and stuff like that. But in reality, the majority doesn't have any choices, and care for the children, and especially self-care for these carers, as Raphael said before, I will also shed a light on the carers, is really a pressing issue which needs to be discussed. Burnout, guilt, stress, emotions experienced in this context. And also, as we discussed in the last webinar, and Corinna pointed out today, time is of great importance. International research shows that mothers have less leisure time, they sleep with more interruptions, and they sleep less. Nevertheless, whether the partner is working full-time and they are working full-time at the same time, mother experience plenty more of guilt than fathers do, even if the fathers are engaged in the care for the children. So we have several gender perspectives which we have to recognize. Of course, we also have class aspects in this context, and also questions of race or ethnicity. And also when we are looking at care work, for example, when we are looking like in the pretty popular case of the Austrian elderly care, 24-hour care, then we have like really a vivid example for what Attila told us before. Migrant care workers who come especially from Eastern Europe, working under poor working conditions, under contract, which wouldn't be legal under other circumstances. So we can see that there are many struggles from these carers too. We have some kind of organizing. We have like a lawsuit which has been brought up from the EG 24 in order to provide better working conditions for these care migrants. These are our species of the neoliberalism on a private sphere, but also on the market sphere, because big corporations have entered the care market. Because there's big money in the 24-hour care in Austria, as it has been legalized. In the case of early childcare, for example, we can see how what we call a quasi-marketization took place, because children have been found as some kind of a future human capital, and the state is investing in it, and it still is a big part of the welfare state. There are private providers, but they are, like I said before, big in the third sector, but nevertheless, there are really poor working conditions. 97% are women who are working in early childcare and education. And as these of you who are stationed in Austria, I think several will be, because we are part of this Ringvorlesung, the carers went out for protest only 2 weeks ago from now, because the working conditions are so poor. But that is unique in Austria, within Austria, that the working conditions in elderly care and childcare are pretty poor. That's also due to the value, which Corinna pointed out earlier, because it is undervalued, and we need a redistribution and a re-evaluation of care. Even in official papers of the European Parliamentary, for example, it is stated that there are poor working conditions within early childcare and early child education. So we can see that we have not only questions of how care is provided, the quality of care persons are receiving, but also working conditions. If we want to talk about planetary boundaries, societal boundaries, social boundaries, I think we should also shed a light on these questions. And we can see it all around the world that there are big struggles also from which come from the side of the care workers in unpaid or paid forms. And there, although I could talk much longer, my time is up, I think.
Thank you very much. Yes, and thank you for this insights in your research, and also in the specific kind of care work, especially in this childcare sector, and yes, and this poor and precarious working conditions. Yes, so now we have, I think, a very good foundation for bigger discussion. So I think now you have the chance to ask each other, or to discuss what you want to discuss. So I don't know who want to start, but I think there will be one of you who want to start.
I mean, I can start.
Yes.
Because I was the first speaker, so I couldn't react to anything of what Attila or Fabienne said in my first intervention, but we'll try to do it briefly now. So I think we have a lot of common sense here, right? Like I feel like we all agree that decent care for all within planetary boundaries is not possible within a planetary growth paradigm, within a capitalist growth paradigm, within a neoliberal growth paradigm. So I think the perspectives Attila had, especially the ones on care migration, really pointed towards the limit of this marketization strategies. And what Fabienne also brought up, I think, is really important. that we also need to look at not only at the care receivers, but also at the care workers' struggles. So decent care for all within planetary boundaries also means that we cannot reproduce intersectional inequalities along global care chains. I think what maybe is biggest question. So I think we all agreed that marketization and the shifting strategy with regard to marketization has severe problems. I think maybe what would be interesting to discuss more, and this is a question I would maybe give to Attila, is the role of public provisioning and welfare states, or to both Fabienne and Attila, because I think you did, Attila, point towards non-capitalist mixed economies, also the ones we had in the past, showing in a way that they are much better, and I totally agree in providing this good care for all. At the same time, and Fabienne, you also pointed to that welfare states are not the same everywhere, they change through neoliberalization. But I think yeah, so what I would like to know is what you consider this non-capitalist mixed economy to be like, because you, Attila, said we have basically the two options, like the state and the market. And I always try, like in feminist economics, we have this care diamond, saying that care can be provided either a market, state, third sector, or households. And I always try to say it's too narrow. Like if we really want a social ecological transformation, we also need to include, for example, I myself work a lot on the sphere of the commons and like unpaid collective care work, and what role could this have, for example, in a mixed economy? So basically the two questions. If both of you could elaborate a bit on the role of the welfare state you see in those post-capitalist economies, and also the question of collective non-paid forms of caring.
I'm happy to react. I think these are very important questions. First of all, let me make clear, when I say state market, both are exploiting the other parts of the society, which is doing the unpaid care work. So that is taken for granted, right? That's all. So in that sense, but let me give you a very direct example. In the mid-1990s, I had the great quote-unquote opportunity to work with a power plant, which was being privatized. And literally, I'm quoting the discussion I could see between the investor and the human resource manager. And this was the following, that the human resource manager, a very kind woman, comes up with the question is that, dear whoever, I don't want to give names, dear whoever, we have a little bit of a problem with regard to the workers' hostels. And then this person looks at workers' hostels. So what's that? Well, you see here in this power plant, we have, young engineers and, very young families, and there are housing problems. So we provide them workers' hostels, and then the company is paying that. And then looks like this and says, sell it now. And then the next sentence comes, this, I remember her eyes. And I said, okay, but sorry, then, but we also have kindergarten. Kindergarten? He starts asking. And I said, yes. And then generally, who takes care of kindergarten? Well, generally self-government or local governments are doing this. Give it back to the local government now. And that was the discussion, which crystal clearly shows how you create an enormous care problem just in a day during this privatization. And actually, the point what I was trying to make was exactly, in some ways, and I do not misunderstand me, I have no nostalgia toward that form of socialism in a whole different ways, because horrible mistakes were made. So that's crystal clear. But in that sense, there is something very important, namely that taken care of in case the workers themselves are able to bring their care problems to the workplace, and the workplace participates in this and not excludes that, because this is exactly the thing what we need to avoid. Now, in order to have that, this is a very crystal clear power relationship and ownership problem, because in the current way, there is no manager. The manager was behaving correctly according to the current rules. He was having in the head what to report to the shareholders concerning, the cost structure and then the profit they are making. By the way, they managed to get guaranteed profit from the state in between us, right? So that was also very funny in that sense. But the point is that I think this is why I started talking about this non-capitalist mixed economy, is that we really have to look at some of the key institutions of capitalism to control and then to change it, because that is going to be the way how things can be really solved in that way, and how power relations can be changed. So that was the point. As soon as companies are not for sale, and for the longer run, there is a stakeholder on behalf, so the workers themselves have power over that, local government has power over that, then it means that a whole lot of care problems can be solved very quickly in various ways, not only just because of funding, also because of having a work regime which is able to take care of these things. So most of the workers, when they have in industrial companies, they always, shifting their, when is my shift, and then what can I change because of family problems. So the most important thing is to have this, I remember very important historical sociological studies by Tamara Kahari event. So whether you control the workplace in terms of time, and this was mentioned by Fabienne as well. So that's it. So this is what I mean, but I'm happy to continue with the non-capitalist things. The only thing is that we really need to move out from a from the current institutions in order to think about ecologically and social. And then as soon as this is it, then this household work and thing is not unseen and just exploited in all different ways. Exploited by these companies who make an enormous profit on or at the expense of the people who are doing all their best to work day and night. And one more thing, and then this is the last, very important, the online work. A colleague of mine, Beata, she has just completed a very nice work on online, so during COVID, and online work and mothers and what the outcome was horrible. Basically, they were checking each other at 2 in the morning whether who was online and who was not online, while they were at home as well. So in that sense, this is just an additional comment what I wanted to share with everybody. So this onlineization of work has enormous dangers in terms of proper care. And then this is what Fabienne was talking about: guiltiness, emotional stress, not sleeping, and so on, which is just, more and more we are going to need to take care of the caretakers, because they are going to be in trouble very soon. So yes, but brilliant comment. Thank you very much, Corinna.
Yeah, I think I can easily pick up on what Attila was saying. I think it is pretty important that care is integrated in work and not the other way around. Because I think today it's always like the primacy of work and of gaining money, and not the primacy of care. So you also showed it in your picture at the beginning, Corinna. Like care should be at the end, ecology should be at the tip of the iceberg, to say it somehow like that. And I think that there need to be substantive changes within welfare states, because I think it's pretty important. I stress that care is now individualized, and it's like an individual problem, which might be, Toronto says, it might be solved by it said that it is solved by the market during neoliberalism, but it isn't, as we have shown. So I think the state needs to engage very much, and we need to invest a lot of money in care, at least, and not from the perspective where it is important only for the economy in the future, because as Raphael pointed out before, I'm doing my research on early childcare and early child education, and I just briefly pointed out that children were recognized as human capital, and this is why everywhere in the world, not only in the global south, there's investment in early childcare and early child education, and mainly with the perspective on the last one, namely the education of the children, because they are the basis for economic growth in the future, and their mothers are integrated in the labor market by expanding that. That's why the state or the third sector plays such an important role in the expansion of early childcare, because social investment has shown that you will get back money from investing in this phase of life. And this is why I think state is pretty important, but you have to see wisely, as Attila said before, and welfare state is pretty important in this case, in order to socialize questions of reproduction and care and not individualize it. But you have to be careful what you wish for, because in this times, as I said before, for example, in Austria, the state plays a pretty important role, but measurements of new public management, for example, have been implemented in order to monitor like care, as it is a business as usual, and as we all know, it isn't a business as usual. And I think also one pretty important thing you mentioned, it wasn't a part of your question, Corinna, but I want to pick up on that, is the household or the family as an important aspect within that. As right now I'm working in a project on norms around motherhood, I also think we also have to work on the perspective of who should take care under which circumstances, because it's also not only about the infrastructure. The infrastructure is pretty important to socialize care, but it's also the politics who refamilize care, for example, and put it into the families again, which is a pretty important topic in the case of the children in Austria. And we have to talk about the question, who got which role in caring, and have to think about that too. We also have to think on the other parts of care, which are not good for the profit and which are put into the family, and have to discuss how we can bring them from the backstage to the front stage. And that's also the same, I think, for ecological questions. And perhaps, Corinna, you can also pick up on this question, I can think, because I think you have a lot of thoughts of that from this feminist economic perspective, which is similar but different to the sociological perspective as I have experienced in the past.
Yes, so I think this was perhaps a first round, I don't know, perhaps because this was at the beginning a question for both of you, Fabienne and Attila, from Corinna. I don't know if the other ones have, I don't know, want to respond to the inputs or to follow up the current debate.
Yes, then let me ask back to both of you, because you all agree that. So, how this new redistributive system you are talking about can actually operate in terms of? So, how do you see the kind of the economic institutions behind that? So, how did that work? Because I think that expectations, especially from the state in capitalism, in various ways, I think is really futile. Because they are not going to be able to do that because this is in their nature. And let me not go into this in details, but I think philosophically that can be very clearly defended. So what would be, so let me ask about this. So Corinna, you started talking about, but Fabienne also referred to that, and so I would like to listen to that.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I can start maybe. So how do I see economic institutions and also the role of the state behind it? So for me, I think, and maybe I'm not sure if it is a point of disagreement that we have, but for me, the role of the welfare state is also one, or of states generally, is also one of an enabler for self-organization. And like with self-organization, I don't mean like going back to the family mainly, but I really also refer to, and I mean, feminist movements have done this for decades to really try to self-organize collective forms of care work which are unpaid. So in Germany, for example, there is this example of the Kinderläden, so children shops, which weren't shops, but basically places where you would store your children while you did other things, where one parent took care of a lot of them. So also in the health sector, I think there are those polyclinics which try to counteract. So I really also think that we can and should learn a lot from the spheres of collective self-organization and commoning, which I agree there is definitely in capitalism. This can also be seen as something, a strategy to get care cheaply done. But if it's really embraced as a strategy of resistance, as a strategy of movement building, of organizing a society around care, I think it can be really, really enlightening in the way of how we also transform ourselves if we put care in the center. And I think that here in this regard, and I've worked extensively with Miriam Lang on the topic, who's based in Ecuador. And I think here we can learn a lot actually from societies that haven't had the historical privilege of welfare states. So also seeing that European welfare states exist because of our colonial heritage. Like now it's the best we have right now in Europe. So I'm totally agreeing that we should defend them against marketization, but also at the same time in some ways think beyond them. And I think we can learn from those collective practices of caring, like the typical African proverb, it takes a village to raise a child, of how we do it. And in this sense, I think, to come back to your question, how do we need to change economic institutions for that? I think the state would need to take a role of an enabler by, for example, freeing up time. Adelheid Biesecker in our last webinar, or the first webinar actually, she said, if we really care about social ecological transformation, nobody will have time for 40 hours spent in wage work. So freeing up time and space for putting care in the center. And I think it's not mutually exclusive, right? I think in the times when people when people work, wage work, they also, as you said, care should be integrated into the work and not the other way around. But I think it shouldn't be all tried to organize in a way alienated way, but also parts of it should go back to the sphere of everybody should take on caring responsibilities, because it's basically what upholds our societies in the long term.
Yeah, I think I'm in the middle between you, because I think, yes, we can learn a lot of it, and we should have a look on the global south and also on the care struggles, which are the questions. That is why I also try to bring in the perspective of the care workers, because I think we can also learn from the struggles they do, because they have like big they want to provide decent care, and this is what we can see in the struggle. What is this decent care? What's missing for decent care? Also within the sphere of paid care work. And I think under the current power relation we face with the defeat of like progressive social movements and stuff like that, it's pretty important to still have faith in these movements that they can change things. But I don't know whether it is a non-capitalist mixed economy or which kind of economy can solve the problem. But I think even with the perspective of going beyond capitalism, beyond this kind of economy, we still can learn from these struggles. And we will see whether it will work within capitalism or not. I think that's pretty difficult to see, but I think we are pretty Polanyian. I'm pretty happy because, as Raphael said before, I'm a member of the International Karl Polanyi Society, and Attila will be our visiting professor. And I think the perspective we are now discussing is some kind of a double movement in which we'll be working out whether the welfare state could be interpreted as a counter movement in the Polanyian sense, as a protection from capitalism, or whether it couldn't be, and whether we need something which would go further. And I would say I'm standing in the middle between you both, because I'm not quite as optimistic, but I'm not quite sure whether it is futile to think welfare state could do something for us with it under capitalist circumstances. But I think we have to work on the power relations in any case, and the struggle is pretty important, to have a look at the struggles, and also to have a closer look on different forms how care could be provided. And I think your perspective on the power plant you described before, Attila, it was pretty vivid from everyday life, how devastating it can be when it is just care crises are created and care isn't recognized anymore. I think we can see it everywhere. Yes, and I think we all agree, and I think that's one thing we could have seen throughout all of the webinars till now. Time is a pressing topic on the question of care, because for care you need time, especially for decent care. Yes, so I'm sorry that I don't have such a clear position.
So so now we are, I don't know, at perhaps Fabienne, if you want, you can take the chance to ask the other ones. I don't know. You were like, oh no, not right now.
I think there are already two questions seems to be there from the audience. The last time the audience was more hesitant, so I think we can all, from my side, we can also.
But I wanted to ask you because it's fair. We want to be fair. I want to be fair to you, to all of you three. And so so I think now we can start with this open discussions. And yes, I think there are already two questions. I saw one hand, but before that there was a question from the audience, from Blanca Tena. I don't know if you want to, if you want to ask the question personally, but otherwise I can read it.
I can ask it personally. I was wondering what your perception is of self-care, whether it also belongs to your definition of care or not, or like is this more like a capitalistic view of individualism being responsible for oneself? Yeah, that's overall it. Thank you.
Well, thanks, Blanca. I think the question, or at least in the chat, you addressed it to me, so I'll just start answering it. So I think in feminist economics, what is often used to distinguish care work from other activities, from other care activities, is the so-called third-person criterion. So the question if it would be possible to pay someone else to do something for you. And I think in this definition, maybe self-care is kind of a gray zone, I would say. I personally would still think that self-care is important, but it's also one of the topics where we really see neoliberalism hitting, right? So Audre Lorde has stated already in the 1980s that caring for myself is not self-indulgence. It is self-preservation, and that is an act of political warfare. And I think actually, like, if you take self-care from this perspective, from the perspective of resisting basically, for example, increasing acceleration of life, of taking time to maybe do nothing. So I think then it can be part of such a definition of care in the broader sense of care for social ecological transformation. However, obviously, if basically your life is very accelerated and then your self-care is only to go to a massage every second day in between in order not to get a burnout, then this is not what we would consider good care for all. So I think it's a very good example to show how some of the things have a radical potential or a transformative potential, but can be very easily incorporated by individualism. How I would answer it.
May I add a thought, although I wasn't asked, because right now I'm doing a paper on self-care of mothers, and it's really like an important question. And from a sociologist's perspective, I would say self-care is a part of care, but as all kinds of care, it doesn't have to be decent. So, and during times of neoliberalism, a lot of times it's also subordinated to the demands of the market, and this is also or subordinated in the case of mothers. Self-care is always a way in order to stay fit to take care of the other family members. So that I wouldn't call a decent kind of self-care. But I think that's really an important question, because there's a lot of struggle around self-care, and self-care is also, in the case of social media and the media in general, a really huge topic, and in contrary, not such a big topic in the case of research. I found out during my research with the colleagues, which we are doing right now with Ulrike Zadler and Eva Maria Schmidt. And I think it's really also a pressing topic, because we all know a certain self-care is also the basis for us, and also for social and ecological sustainability, and also boundaries have to be recognized. Yeah, sorry, I just wanted to add that, although I was asked, but I think it's really an important issue.
Can I also add one sentence to this? So this enormous commodification of various services, which are seemingly about care and can be consumed. So there's an enormous business around this. So once again, we have to look at what is the dynamic of this? Is this really something of really taking care of the person itself? And then, as Fabienne very nicely alluded to this, how your care is related to other people's care around you. This is something. So these two things. So commodified services which just serve, I don't know, that you go another type of gymnastics might not be really the type of a thing what we are talking about. But self-care, meaning that you take your time and you are able to regenerate yourself psychologically, emotionally, and so on, together with the others and with an eye on the others. This is what I think. So these are the two crossing points where you can actually separate it, whether it's care or not, or it's just a consumption or some kind of another thing.
Yes, here Corinna recommended the book in the chat, How to Do Nothing, Resisting the Attention Economy by Jenny Odell, for thinking more about non-commodified self-care. Okay, because there's not so much research, Fabienne told us, perhaps everybody has to read this book. Okay, there's another question from Julia Dean.
Yeah,
now we have time for you.
Thank you. Thank you all for the really interesting points. So as you might be able to hear, I'm American, but I also was born in Romania, and talking or listening to all of you talk about the roles that perhaps the state can play, or non-state actors, or the family, I'm really reflecting on the relationship in all of these with trust. So how can, you guys recommend some solutions to rebuild trust? Because, for example, in the US, there was always sort of this idea of the neighborhood and people taking care of each other in the neighborhood, and that you could go to your neighbor, and when they moved in, they would bring a casserole, an auflauf. And then if you had some problems, you could take, your kids to them, right? Or in Romania, there's, so little trust now between fellow Romanians because of, basically the behaviors that were recommended or forced onto them by the communist regime. So I feel like in a lot of cultures now, there's such a lack of trust amongst others that sometimes it feels the most trustworthy to just pay somebody and to know that money doesn't lie, right? And if I can pay somebody to take care of my kids, I trust them more than maybe my neighbor, or I don't have anybody else. So what are some, tactics or recommendations that you would all recommend, whether it is within the family or the social unit, or the market itself, to rebuild those trusting relationships?
Very good question. Who wants to start? Okay, I give you, because I was making this point that the workplace and the care should come together in a lot of ways. Actually, I have seen fantastic historical sociological analysis of workers' movement, how the trust, it's social capital. Any kind of a workers' movement is social capital, because through being a member of that movement, you may benefit in various ways. And how, the key conditions for social capital, this is what we always say, is trust. And how trust can be built up. And workplace is actually, this multiple shift. Workplaces were very good in building trust, exactly because of the family problems. Because whenever you are changing your shifts, and then you are constantly doing this with others, meaning, and then because of your family needs and your problems you want to solve, and so on and so on. With this is what actually the analysis came with the conclusion, was that there was an enormous trust being built up. And then that's it. But once again, I'm not promoting here that everybody should have a shift work and we should have a night shift, which is awful for everybody. So do not misunderstand me. The only thing I'm trying to say is that as soon as workers are able to work in a way in which way they're also trying to help others to solve their problems, and then the next day the others are coming and they are helping you, that how the work and the family and then all these things can be, that itself is a trust building. So that was my point. Because, as soon as emotional family things can go into the workplace, then you have much more trust. The worst is that you have these zombie companies where everybody is working like a zombie, as if they have nobody at home, nobody to take care of, and so on and so on. But we have such things, but this is absolutely against trust. That's for sure.
I think that's really an important question, the question of trust, which is also a difficult question. And I think Attila has a great point, because he's pointing at a practice. And I think that's really important, as I said before. When I said I'm in the middle of the position of Corinna and Attila, I stressed that we have to have a look at good practices. And I think you have to support certain kinds of practices within the neighborhood. And you can organize neighborhoods. There are a lot of examples where this happens, also under catastrophic situations where people can trust each other, although it hasn't been like that before. COVID has been an example with a lot of neighborhoods help. Strange people from the neighborhood went shopping for other people, and so forth and so forth. And I think you can only gain trust if you have a practice people can trust in. And that can be the practice which Attila described before in the working places, where you can trust that your colleagues fit in for you and something like that, and you can depend on that. Or it can also be some kind of practice you develop within the neighborhoods. And then I can go back to what I said in my initial statement. The individualization of the question is one of the things why we don't have trust, because it's my individual problem and there's no one else I can point at and stuff like that. And I really think you need some kind of practices in order to build up trust again. I hope I could have explained what I meant. It's really like some kind of sociological perspective, I think.
Maybe to add one last sentence to it, I also think it's a really important question you're raising, Julia, with regard to what I talked before about this more collective forms of decommodified care and stuff. I think people who experience it also will learn to regain trust in it. But I think there are also limits, and I think that's important to reflect upon. That's why I would always also think that collective forms of decommodified caring can never be a standalone solution, because obviously if you have, for example, very intensive long-term care needs you really depend on to be given, like you also, because in those collective forms, it also always has to, or often has to do something a bit with reciprocity. And I think we also need institutions that give us the trust that even if we're in a very intensive long-term care situation, we're taken care of. That's why I think our perspectives are very complementary on that, and we need a remix of all those in order to arrive at decent care for all, really.
That's exactly mixed economy. So you were, the point is, what are the guarantees that one is not eating up the other and one is not dying out? These are really the big sociological questions.
But mixed economy, including the unpaid sphere, but including it without trying to monetize it. So I think very often in those mixed economy approaches, we try to monetize also the unpaid and really giving a kind of different language of valuations than money, where basically we have then a mixed economy. I would agree.
Yeah.
So there's another question from Lukas Spatz.
Hello, thank you very much for these interesting presentations. I was just wondering about well, there was something, I think Attila, for example, pointed out that there's a phase or something where actually we not only have to take the care workers actually have to take care of themselves. So I think that's really a sad issue or something, and a crucial one. And I was just fascinated by the concept of the regenerative economy. It was it's I think maybe it's some kind of a buzzword, but this was introduced by John Fullerton and the Capital Institute, and now, for example, there's also an institute for regenerative economy in Germany, just founded last year. And I was wondering, maybe are you aware, like this is like taking this perspective of that we have that actually we should shift from this monetarizing aspect towards giving more importance to other aspects, such as also qualitative factors like balance and beauty and stress levels. So I don't know, maybe are you aware of or are there interlinkages of some papers of this concept, maybe with the care economy? It's just a general question, maybe.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, the others, why don't you? I don't want to monopolize things.
No, I thought because you were the one who was explicitly mentioned by name.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, then I answer the first part, right? Just very quickly, and then one very short comment on the other one. So that to take care of the care workers, absolutely, this is very important. And also, this is something which a lot of people talk about. So we have different, life cycles, and then sometimes we need care, sometimes we provide care, but also it's very important that care work is also limited. both because just of work conditions, but also in life cycle, it is also somewhat limited, because this is what you need to shift in certain ways, not to be stuck in this altogether. So that's very important. Plus, very importantly, all the psychological, emotional traumas these people are going through, anybody who has been taken care of, very sick people, and so on, that it knows. It's like, you know, so a psychologist needs, you know, supervision. Every 2 weeks, they need supervision, right? And the care workers, they never get this, and nobody is paying for that. That they should get this professional supervision to get out of these problems and things. And also they may have, you know, problems not having their own family, which would be a very natural way to overcome some of the problems, because the family is not with them. So in that sense, I think it's what you are raising is very important. Concerning the regenerative economy, to be honest, I have just always what I learned from history is, as soon as you start, and don't misunderstand me, not just the market can be awful, the state super redistribution can be also awful. So any kind of an economy which is dominated by one single form, and then you start controlling it, then society regenerates, because immediately they see certain options how to overcome and then to multiply the different social forms they are living in. And I think that's very important, not to homogenize or over homogenize economies and societies with certain things, because that's definitely not the solution.
And maybe to add to what Attila just said, and to follow up on the second part of your question about how we should and need to move from basically monetary values as the center stage of everything to other criteria, I would totally agree with that. And I think one concept that captures this very well is Joan Martinez Allier's concept of languages of valuation. So he says, in our societies, we have plural languages of valuation, but often in capitalist growth paradigms, the monetary language of valuation becomes hegemonic. So the task is really to make place for this plurality, right? Like it means in a way, it doesn't mean that there cannot be any paid care work or anything. It doesn't mean that we have to abolish money for that, but it means that we shouldn't leave it as the hegemonic language of valuation. And I think there are many other criteria that we can take into account. For me, the most insightful one really is from a Spanish ecofeminist. It's been published in English very recently. Like she has written a book, La Sostenibilidad de la Vida, in 2014, The Sustainability of Life. Her name is Amaya Perez Orozco. And there was a recent paper last year, which I think for the first time really translated it to English as The Sustainability of Life. And I think this is a criterion which really bridges those ecological perspectives with the perspectives on decent care for all, and which could be center stage, so to say, in our look for alternatives to monetary languages of valuation. I posted the link in the chat.
So I don't know, Fabienne, if you want to okay, I see your no. Yes, but I think we have another question from Christa Wichterich.
Yes, thank you very much for this interesting conversation. The first one is about economic institutions. I was wondering, Attila, that you mentioned only the two economic institutions, the state and the market. But what is very obvious from our conversation, that the household or the family is a certain economic institution which plays a very important role when we talk about social reproduction and care work. So I would like to suggest to take this immediately in as an economic institution. My second point relates once again to decent work. What is our understanding of decent work? Of course, we can learn a lot from the recent movements, how they define decent works. And we see, for example, in the German hospital movement, a shift from demands for payment, for recognition, less work burden, and quality of care. So there is these new notions of decent beyond the conventional trade unionist objectives of salary and work conditions. But I would suggest to take another perspectives into account when we talk about decent work. And this relates to the migrant workers in the transnational care chains, because each transnational care chain goes along with the care drain in the country or the household of origin. And if we talk about decent work here, then we have to take into account that we create a shortage of care in another place. So decent should include these perspectives. And that is not easy to do. I'm working on this very much, but still a definition of decent should somehow try to include this spatial perspective. Of course, this is very also related to time, everything else you mentioned already, but still we should think of this. I always bring this in when talking about our imperial mode of living, includes very much an imperial mode of reproduction, drawing care work from the global south or less wealthy countries or households. And this is going along very much with an ethnicized or racialized division of labor. And our definitions of decent work should include these perspectives as well. Thank you.
Yes, concerning the first one, I think your point is absolutely relevant, but I already wanted to make clear. So in that sense, the household, I did not forget it, but it was actually the suppressed part. And then any kind of course, any kind of a mixed economy, which brings households back into this, and not in a suppressed or an exploited way. Plus, very importantly, what I know in economic sociology is exactly the same, that any kind of a family care work or any kind of an economic activity, which can be, producing, vegetables or producing berries or whatever, it always just operates if the market is controlled. So there are several markets. So there is controlled market and uncontrolled market, and in various ways you can control market. So if market is controlled and some of the actors like the state, well, let's say the cooperative, is supporting these families in various ways, they can do it. This immediately gives a variety in the economy, in the sense they are able to operate, because the market can destroy and take away everything very quickly if it is unlimited. So this is when it's become absolutely exploited. So let me just give an example. I know certain areas where families were producing berries and they were making extra revenues out of that. Very important income generation is going on. Now, till the moment there were cooperatives supporting them with, fertilizer, with various things, they were able to withstand all kinds of market pressures. As soon as it was taken away, the market swept aside everything. So in that sense, that's one of the biggest problems with the marketization, that it is actually disempowering this it is paralyzing families and households in some of their very adaptive things. And I think even in the care work, that can be the case. So that's what I just wanted to say, that you are right. Household, absolutely. This is one of the most important form, and in various ways we can integrate households into these things. And this is what we need to think about. So the only thing I can say at this late moment is that I fully agree with you that this is, let household bring it back to the surface. But I think this is what Corinna and Fabienne was also talking about in all different ways. The problem is it's not going to happen in capitalism. I think this is what Nancy Fraser says as well, crystal clearly. So it's not going to happen. And I think I agree with her. The second question, I left it open.
I think Fabienne is already
I think
unmuted. Yeah.
Attila mentioned it with only one short sentence, the care drain, in his talk before in the presentation, that he said there's care missing where the migrant carers are coming to care for us, for example. And I think you made a really important point with that. I can just make the same notion that Attila did before, because I think you are right. We have to recognize that it's not only about the care within our spheres, but also how care within global perspective on care, how care is provided, also in the countries where we take care from. We just profit on care migration and global inequalities and care workers who are in need to take care for people in other countries. So there is a deficit in the countries they are coming from. I think that's really an important topic you pointed at, and I think this is really also important that research is done on this topic. As I said before, for example, in the case of childcare and early childcare, you can also see that, for example, this program of social investment are also a way how capitalism reacts to that in the global south they are implementing programs for early childcare and education because the carers are missing there, and they are seeing that they are in deep need for carers within there, but that doesn't solve the problem anyway, because it isn't decent care which is provided there. And I think we have to recognize that, and we have to recognize the inscripted inequalities in care provision from a global perspective. So I think you're totally right on pointing that out, and on pointing out that there are care gaps which are arising due on the way how we fix our care gaps, on the way which capitalism makes it easier to fix them temporarily.
Can I give a perfect example for that from an interview? Sorry, just one sentence. So one woman in Baranya County in Hungary giving an interview to a PhD student of mine. She was asked about why she wanted to go to Austria to take care of other people. And then the answer was, oh, my husband got very sick, so I had to go. That was really the answer. And then I think this sums up the point, because the loss of revenue meant that she was forced to look for some options, and that was the only option she could find. So that's a beautiful example. What you were talking.
Yeah, thanks a lot also from my side for those comments, Krista. I couldn't agree more with both of them. I really think that those are important points. And I think additionally to what the other speakers have already mentioned, it's a great leverage point to link our topic back to questions of the ecology, of environmental justice, and as you mentioned, the imperial mode of living is a concept which talks a lot about the externalization of ecological consequences of our modes of consumption. And the same happens for care. And you yourself, I mean, it's a text I'm working with my students coins this topic of care extractivism as basically yet another way of linking up debates on extractivism, for example, of non-renewable resources to the sphere of care, where basically in the end, we always have, even with the long chains, in the end, we have somewhere where care is missing. And I think this requires a spatial perspective. It requires a temporal perspective, because I think the only way of actually solving it is by not externalizing it. And this requires time to also do it ourselves. So I think those perspectives are really important and bring us back to this link between care and nature. So thanks for raising them.
Hey, so I don't see any more questions from the audience, but I also think we are almost at the end. We just have 10 more minutes, and I think this is the best opportunity for all the three of you. I don't know, first of all, thank you for all this wonderful inputs and this very interesting discussions. And I think now perhaps it's good for you to, I don't know, to have some final words. I don't know, to summarize this debate. We all agree that it's still an open discussion, but I think we have to come to an end. And so you have the opportunity for final words to summarize your ideas. I don't know, and you can choose who wants to start or who wants to end this discussion today.
I will start with the ending. Perhaps I just posted a link because it was perfect that Christa raised this question, and that you said we are not at the end, because there will be another webinar on the topic elaborating further on the questions we discussed in 2 weeks, where Christa Wichterich will be one of the speakers. And I think she will give us insights on the questions on the global perspective. I hope so. And yeah, I think today we had like a pretty interesting discussion, because we have like a common ground we are standing on, and have similar perspective, but different perspective. And it was pretty interesting for me to see how we think decent care can be provided within planetary boundaries from different angles and from different perspectives. And I think we can agree on the question that under the current circumstances, it isn't the basis for decent care, and that we have a lot of work to do in order to broaden our perspective and to find a pathway out of the current situation, which is not only endangering care, but also endangering the nature, and so endangering the basis of our living. Yeah, that's my concluding sentence. Thank you very much for the interesting discussions.
We should continue. Okay, then let's reverse the order, right? And then Corinna is going to have the final word in this. Yes, I think we have to see care as many other things in this current neoliberal version of capitalism, globally, not very importantly globally, that it is unable to solve. So there are various problems which are emerging. One, not to say it's unable to solve the problem of war or peace. That's just one, which is the most basic thing. And then also very importantly, I have happened to see this, how big mess has been created around migration itself. So migration is some kind of such a contradictory topic. It is embedding so many contradictions at one time that the states and the societies are unable to give an answer to that. So that's the next one. Care is certainly one of the things. Actually, the care crisis is blowing up. Very importantly, it is blowing up in the global south. This is what we rarely talk about it, but it's really blowing up because so many people have no decent social security. I think the COVID crisis in Chile was a very good example when people started taking back money from private pensions in order to survive. And that showed things how desperate the situation can be. Not to speak about the declining peasantries in Ethiopia or in sub-Saharan Africa and how those societies are struggling, or South Asia in various ways. So I think it's very, very important, and the care is not going to, the care crisis is not going to be solved. That's for sure. Which means ultimately that we are going to live in critical periods. And in order to show that I agree in other things as well with Fabienne as well as Corinna as well, of course, the social movement. But I think what we were trying to do, so look, the crisis is coming and it's here, and it's not just because we are talking about it. The second is that social movements are also coming in some ways. I think they should go further on. Certainly we are going to get into very critical periods very soon in various ways. I think this is why we have to quicken up one thing, and this is the only thing, this was actually the intention, is to really to think about much more systematically what kind of economic models can actually operate in complex societies like ours, with complex problems of ecology, freedom, and so on, and how we are going to solve it. So the very much the Polanyian mission is that what are our options? And we have to come to conclusions very soon, because we have to be able to tell that, oh, this is the way you may have to go. So I think this kind of an international discussion and work, very importantly empirical work as well, is to be quickened up. That would be my final point. And thank you very much. It was a privilege, really.
There's not so much I can add, really. Like, I think there was a hope during COVID that, if anything, it shows that the wealth and well-being of societies rests upon social reproduction and the spheres of paid and unpaid care work. It was a hope of feminists who have called for this visibilization for long, that something changed. I think things, if anything, have aggravated since. So we need to bring up and keep bringing up the topic and the struggle. And I think that's what we did today. I mean, in the end, it's already the third webinar, and we still didn't solve the care crisis. Neither did we abolish capitalism, but also maybe that's a bit much to ask for a webinar from 6 to 8 p.m. And maybe that's a legacy we can leave to webinar 4 in 2 weeks, to which we hope that all of you will zoom in. Thanks a lot for the discussion. I think it really brings together, again, many pieces that will help us and understand better and ultimately formulate strategies to deal with the care crisis. Thanks.
So yes, so I think now we are at the end of this webinar, and Fabienne already posted the link for the next and last webinar on transformative change and changing societies, deindustrialization, digitization, planetary boundaries, and care, with very interesting speakers, Roland Atzmüller, Kimay Pflücke, Andrea Vetter, and also Christa Wichterich. And yes, and I'm very interested in this last webinar, and I thank you all of you three, and also Julia for all the technical support here in the background. So it was a very, very nice and interesting evening with all your interesting perspectives. And yeah, thank you, and have a good evening.